Happy New Year and welcome to the Audacious Life Podcast. I'm your host, Steph Roberts, and I just wanted to say thank you for being here, for listening, for hanging in there with me. I have been on a very unusual kind of hiatus where I've kind of been up and down with this show, and I want to let you know that my intention is to release one podcast episode a week. I'm going to do my best to do that because it's become very clear to me that this is a podcast that people need. People are searching it out, and I have lots of guests who want to be on to share their message of hope and inspiration and support for people who are going through emotional, verbal abuse, domestic violence that's not necessarily physical, but is more in the mental realm. And this episode is because we're in January now. I actually recorded this back in December and I was going to release it after Christmas, but it's all about January being the month of divorce. This is the month when people file for divorce more than any other month in the United States. So people keep it together through the holidays, and then when January rolls around, they just, kind of march out and file their papers. So if this sounds like you and you're struggling, you are certainly not alone. And I just wanted to shed some light on an alternative perspective to the divorce process, because everybody thinks you have to run out and hire a lawyer and get ready to do battle. And oftentimes that is really the one thing that's going to kind of pull you down and hold you back. And I just want to express and open your mind to another option, which is mediation. And I'm really glad that I held back this episode a little bit, because just recently I was able to listen to Emma Johnson has a podcast called Like a Mother, and it's for single moms, and she had on a guest. Her most recent guest was Terry Brennan, who's co-founder of Leading Women for Shared Parenting. And if you had told me about this movement a few years ago, I probably would have been like, no way, that's scary. But my kids are older now, and I've seen what the battling, I've seen the impact that not cooperating or living in fear or competing with, your ex, what that can do to your kids. And even when you think you have their best interest at heart, they're so sensitive. There's so many things that they pick up on. So the more there can be laws in place that allow both parents to have a healthy relationship with their kids without it being something that you have to fight for necessarily and do battle with in court. I think that the better things are. And it's about really considering the fact that kids need a minimum of 35% of their time spent with both of their parents in order to achieve a real bond. And, it's exhausting being a solo parent and having primary custody or sole custody. So, obviously if the person that you're with is not a fit parent, then this doesn't make sense. And, there's people in this movement who are looking at domestic violence and, really setting up the guidelines for that as well. But if you're in a position where you both are capable of being good parents and putting the children first, this movement could really eliminate some of the battles that happen in court, save people emotional exhaustion, massive amounts of money, because, and I love this point that she brought up, that the court system and lawyers are really designed to generate paperwork and really generate stronger arguments to really kind of perpetuate the battle, really. So it's not about coming to an agreement. It's not necessarily about putting the kids first. It's about doing battle and one-upping the other person. And that's just not great for anybody involved, mom, dad, the kids, whatever. So anyway, I am excited to have this conversation with, her name is Amy Martell. She is a mediator and she has a really interesting background, and she will get into that. But just consider there's another way to do this that might feel better for everyone involved. It might be more fair for everyone involved, and it might set both of you on a course for more success in your life in general and as parents and co-parents. And if you don't have any children involved, mediation is obviously also a great option for many other reasons, which Amy will get into those reasons as well. So thank you for this long intro and letting me express why I felt it was so important to have this person on and share this perspective. Here she is, Amy Martell.
1 in 4 women have experienced some form of abuse, and 80% of women who leave abusive relationships go back. It's time to change that statistic and give you the audacious life you've always wanted. A life of freedom, peace, and true joy. Put on your headphones and get ready to be inspired.
Welcome to the Audacious Life podcast. I'm very excited to introduce Amy Martell today. Amy Martell is a family mediator, and she's a collaborative lawyer, and she's going to talk to us about what that means exactly. And this is my Christmas gift for everyone, because I've been wanting to bring somebody on like her to talk about our options beyond just heading to court when we're in these situations. So welcome, Amy.
Oh, thank you so much. This is such a treat to get to speak with you and to speak with your audience, and I appreciate this opportunity so much.
I'm so excited. So tell us all about, kind of what you do, and maybe first start with how you arrived at the role that you're in now, because I know you said you used to be a lawyer or strictly a lawyer.
I've been many things. So my path to getting where I am now has been very circuitous. And let me sort of say what I do now and then kind of explain how I got there. So what I do now is I have a law and mediation practice where I help families resolve and prevent disputes mindfully, collaboratively, and out of court. So all the work I do is helping families either work through things like going through a divorce or dealing with child parenting plans and custody, or making plans for elders, or making plans for children who have special needs, but doing so in a way that is communication-centered, efficiency-centered, and client-centered, so that they are the ones who are in the driver's seat. They're the ones who are making the decisions, and my role becomes somewhat of what I call a Sherpa, helping them get from one place to another and holding some of the baggage along the way to make the process a little bit easier. So I can kind of talk about that in a second. And then even when I represent people as their lawyer, I am doing so in a process that is out of court. And I can talk about collaborative law in a minute, which is a separate kind of completely different food group than traditional litigation.
Oh, yeah.
So I came to this. I was a musician. I was a music teacher, a music therapist. And while I was working as a music therapist, I kept hearing voices that said, there's another way that you can use your brain and your skill set in the world. And I thought it was going to be through some kind of legislative advocacy. I was working with children who were in the foster care system and children who were on the autism spectrum, who were living with autism spectrum disorder. And I just felt like I wanted to do advocacy in some way. So eventually that took me to law school. And during law school, I found mediation and collaborative law. And that just seemed to kind of cohese all the different paths in my life in terms of the listening and the improvisation and the being with people and sort of the child-centered way of working in the world, and how can I help sort of in my own tiny little way create these little ripples of peace that can then be, part of the bigger waves.
Nice. I love that. Wow. You sounds like you have the perfect background for, kind of with two people are disagreeing, helping them kind of come together, and also just holding their hands, I guess, along the way and sort of shielding them from some of the other things that are so unpleasant.
Yeah, it has been a really good fit, my children joke because they don't see me they used to see me reading books all the time, literature books, and now they only see me reading books about conflict resolution and mindfulness and listening and all this. That's kind of what my mind is working on all the time.
Nice.
And then, so collaborative law, like I said, is, kind of like soy milk versus milk. They're both good. They both have their purposes in the world, but they're totally different, even though they have the same, nomenclature. So being a collaborative lawyer means that you are working as part of an interdisciplinary team. So as a lawyer, you are working with a mental health practitioner and sometimes a financial practitioner to help families manage the multifaceted issues that come up when they are dealing with some kind of conflict or life transition. And so my role is to support and facilitate my client's ability to navigate the different issues, understand the information, and come up with options and eventually solutions with the person with whom they're in disagreement. So rather than that bully mouthpiece where when I was going to court, my client would say, this is what I want, and I have to figure out how to get them that, either through evaluating the facts or proving certain things or using the law in a particular way and using my argument skills or using bullying skills, which I never did very well. So I was never successful in that way in the litigation realm.
Right.
So now instead my work as a lawyer is really as the, you hear about a counselor. That's what a lawyer was meant to be. A lawyer is an advocate and a counselor, and I represent my client's interests zealously still, but those interests also take into consideration, the gestalt, the whole, all of the different issues that they need to evaluate in order to come to decisions.
Nice.
It was a mouthful. It was a mouthful.
No, that's good. No, it's so great to have kind of the bigger picture and to see how, just your background and how you approach things. And so it's funny you said counselor. Is that the British term for?
It's in the United States, counselor at law. So that's what we're considered. We're counselor at law, and
I guess that's fallen away because we don't often hear that, do we?
Exactly.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Wow. Well, so, my audience, as you know, is mostly comprised of people, men and women, in kind of high conflict relationships, shall we say. So, they're kind of walking on eggshells. There's verbal abuse. Maybe there's a lot of control, both financial, physical, that kind of thing. And, they feel stuck a lot of times. And even though they may want to leave or try to change the situation in some way, it's very scary, whether it's threats or maybe they're just, economically deprived and they don't feel they have the wherewithal to move forward in that situation. I'm just wondering how many people you see now in this collaborative and mediation situation that have this kind of a scenario. Is it quite rare, or?
I would say it's well, and as you and I have discussed offline, looking at the broad spectrum of people who are living in relationships where there's some aspect of this, I would say a lot of people that I work with would represent that they feel this way in their relationship in some way. And again, there's varying degrees of this control, and there's varying degrees of fear. But I do work with people in both mediation and in collaborative law who have to navigate some pretty tricky interpersonal waters. And what I appreciate about these processes is that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes they offer people a different way to get through these emotional minefields as they make these transitions. So, I have a lot of people in mediation who, I have to spend time with each person in the mediation separately and do some coaching, do some communication coaching, do mindfulness coaching, breath work. I kind of bring in all the different disciplines into my work as both a mediator and also as an attorney when I'm coaching my clients as an attorney, still bringing in tools from many disciplines. There's a lot of work in the legal mediation and collaborative law work for people who are partnered with folks who either have access to personality disorders or personality behaviors like that. So there's some good strategies that I use that I can help people use.
That's excellent. And so my interest in having you on is I think that there's just and I've mentioned this offline too, it seems like wherever there is a threat involved, the first piece of coaching that you get is to seek, a restraining order. Also, get a safety plan in place, which the safety plan, I think, obviously is really essential. Let's talk a little bit about that restraining order piece and maybe a little bit of your perspective on that.
Restraining orders can be incredibly necessary at times. And as many people also know, they can just be a piece of paper. Or the alternative is that they can actually be an exacerbation of an already bad situation. So, again, not speaking to anybody's specific situation here, but, at times restraining orders are imperative to keep somebody safe, or to at least have somebody take the action and the steps that they need to take in order to begin to get themselves to a safe place. But I think what you were saying is that people, when we are faced with threat, when we are faced with feeling afraid or concerned or anxiety, our brains naturally go to this place that is very, very ancient, which is there's a saber-toothed tiger that is attacking me. I need to run to that rock and get safe. And so our vision becomes somewhat singular. And people often also immediately launch into, how can I get power in this situation as a response? And I think that's where people often get counseled. That's the reason that people often get counseled to go seek a restraining order. You get power. That's your safe place. There's the biggest rock that we can see is the court system. And so go there. And many times people do. And sometimes that's the right choice for people. What I talk about with people is that sometimes when we quell that reptilian part of our brain and calm down, we can see that there are other options, and that sometimes the other options may actually be preferable. So there may be ways to get safe and to achieve that same safety, and to achieve some of the self-protections and to be prepared, that don't necessarily result in the ratcheting up of adversary, and also the legal walls that are put up once you have a restraining order in place. I mean, there's significant obstacles to the process that to parenting, to communicating, that are in place as soon as you have a restraining order in place.
Right. Yeah, and I think the reason why I wanted the audience to hear that is if, there are people in situations kind of weighing what to do next, and it's feeling more like just a wearing down a daily, where they're kind of leading lives of quiet desperation, where it's just, they've lost the energy, and that, they're not thriving. They're just kind of dying silently. And so they're walking on eggshells, and it's not necessarily a high stake physical kind of conflict, although it could lead to that clearly. And I want to emphasize that many women that I know have had it just kind of spin out of control, and things go in a direction that's like far beyond what they imagined when they were in that life of quiet desperation. I mean, just ratchets up so quickly through the court system. And so I just wanted to talk about kind of the other side of the coin, because I do know not too many, but a handful of women who've kind of successfully avoided the court systems, and they've worked in mediation to create an agreeable separation. And I think that just the mere fact of avoiding the re-abuse system has left them more courageous, more whole, more able to move forward with the next chapter of their lives. So I just wanted to explore that here as much as we can, so that people get to hear kind of what that process is like. So,
well, it's interesting that you talk about that re-abuse of the court system. That's something that I had heard somebody talk about years ago, and I haven't heard somebody speak about that again. I would love, I don't know how much you want to weigh in your thoughts, but when you're giving everything up, you're giving up so much of your power in the court system. And sometimes it goes your way. I mean, people like to think that they go to court, they're going to tell their story, and once they tell their story, they're going to be heard, and everybody around them is going to know that they're right. And sometimes that happens, but most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time, people don't come away from court feeling heard or vindicated. They just feel they just feel worse.
They feel worse, exactly.
and more disempowered, because you really do give up your power when you go to court.
Yeah. And I had somebody actually probably more than one person in my life say, well, why would you want to? Anytime you go before the court, you're giving up power. You're putting it in the judge's hands, right? And so even if you have the best lawyer going and you're feeling great about your case, you still it's a crapshoot. You just don't know if that person had, a bad traffic scenario driving into court that day or something's going on or whatever. It really does, like, so many factors play into that. And so I think that that's the thing I wanted to kind of emphasize, is that while it may not be appropriate for everybody, the mediation process does give you a little bit more time to kind of think things through, try to, it'll seem more fair, I think, negotiating and getting heard in a way that can't be underscored, because I don't think it really does happen to most of us in the court system, at least not the people that I've spoken to.
So I only litigated for 3 years actively. And before that I was working as a judicial law clerk. So I was working for the judges in the probate and family court. And I was, sitting on the bench with them and helping them write decisions. And so I heard hundreds of trials and hundreds of motions, and saw so many people come before the judge. And I know what the judges are thinking. They're good people. They want to do the right thing, but they're given 3 seconds of time. I mean, they're given, that tiny little window into your life. And you're right. They've got their whole day. They've got their whole background. They've got their own biases that they try to keep in check, but we're all human.
Exactly.
So yeah, so you don't, it's really, you are giving up a lot in going to court. And mediation is one option. And there are mediators that are very comfortable managing very, very high conflict situations and do it very, very gracefully. And sometimes those situations are even best handled in what they're called co-mediation situations. So there are people who co-mediate either with a male-female collaborator. So sometimes there have been mediations where I've had a male mediator with me. It just seemed like it was best for the people I was working with. Or where I've had a therapist that I've mediated with. I'm somebody that is very, very comfortable, and actually I think I do well with high conflict couples and high conflict situations. It's an interest of mine, and it's really hard work. And I know that it can be successful. But the other option is this collaborative law model, and that's an option that most people don't know about, because in that situation, the challenge with mediation is that you're on your own. You may have your own attorney outside the room, and maybe even sometimes that attorney comes into the room with you in the mediation. But in Massachusetts, most often family mediations are conducted with just the parties and the mediator or mediators. And that can be very successful for some people, even very high conflict situations. And for some people, it is just overwhelming to think about going into that room on your own and making some of those decisions without someone there by your side.
Sure.
And that's where collaborative law can be such a supportive process for people. And it can actually, I have seen it be actually a reparative process and a transformational process. So in collaborative law, each person hires an attorney who's been trained. And tell me to quiet down if I'm talking too much.
No, this is great. I'm just keep going.
So each person needs to hire an attorney who's been trained in the collaborative law process. And that requires a 2 to 3 day interdisciplinary training, mediation training, and additional training. And the people who sign up to be collaborative lawyers, I like to think of us as kind of a rare breed of people, or a specific breed of people. We're becoming less and less rare, fortunately. And that, we are people who really believe that with the right tools, we can help people get through the situation without needing to resort to a judge. And the two attorneys commit to helping their clients resolve this out of court. And the clients actually sign a binding participation agreement to work in good faith to coming to an agreement out of court. But then at the crux of this process is also that it's facilitated by a neutral, someone we call a neutral facilitator, or sometimes we call them a coach. And the collaborative coach facilitator is always a mental health practitioner. And their role is to be the neutral in the room who is helping both the clients and the attorneys manage those emotional landmines that are inevitably part of any family law transition or family dispute.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
It's pretty amazing. And if I always say, you think about a milking stool has 3 legs because three is the most stable number. Mm-hmm. That coach lends the stability, because even in the situations where I've been working with another attorney who's very settlement minded, inevitably there's this tendency to kind of start falling into that adversarial mindset that, if I want to get enough from my client, that means the other person has to get less. The coach really holds the process, helps the clients think about their big picture goals, their short picture goals. And then the mental health coach also brings in the ability to navigate some of these sometimes, challenging situations where there may be one person who has some bipolar tendencies or has some narcissistic tendencies, or where there has been, a communication breakdown of such significance that it's really hard for one of the parties to imagine being in the same room with the other person, but they really want to keep this process out of court. And it can enable these people to get through the situation. It's not easy. It's not kumbaya, but they get through it. And then at the end of it, they can still co-parent. They're not dropping their kids off at the police station for transitions.
Yeah. And two things came up when you were saying that. So one of them is it seems really clear to me that the level of anger, ire, whatever that's, kind of exploding in court is really difficult to regain your balance from, and status quo and the calm and co-parent. So the kids pick up on that negative stimuli and anger between the two parents. So I can see how this would hugely benefit the children. And obviously if there's a therapist in the room thinking about everyone's, best interest, they're obviously thinking about the children as well. Mm-hmm. The other piece of this, though, that I was just wondering about, given the number of women that I've spoken to who've been, their court cases have dragged on and on and on, keep getting back, or they're, on both sides, men and women. How much money are you saving? I think it seems like you would be saving a ton of money, but maybe it costs more to have multiple people up front, but in the long run, are you saving a lot of money? Like, are there any statistics around that?
You framed it perfectly. So I think what the statistics show is that for the most part, for people who get through their whole case and maybe don't go to trial, this may cost somewhat the same depending on what are the issues that need to be resolved, what is the information that people need to evaluate. Or it can be a cost saving. So it's almost always it's absolutely less than going to trial. There's no question that this is going to be a less costly process than going to trial. Okay. But you're right. Having more people in the room at the outset can be more expensive. Now, here's what can also happen. This coach is not working as a therapist per se. They're not doing therapy. So they really are doing facilitative and integrative dispute facilitation. I don't know how to describe what they're doing, but they are working with people and the emotional currents that are underneath any dispute and helping them manage that, and then understand their needs, goals, and concerns in a way that is, again, multifaceted. What they can also do, so in a collaborative case, sometimes the attorneys don't always have to be in the room for every situation if people can be in the room with the coach alone. So sometimes we have had situations where through one meeting or two meetings with the full team, with everybody supporting the people involved, then they get to a certain point where their reptile brain is relaxed enough that they can sit in the room with the coach and talk about their parenting plan. Or they can have, I've had situations where there's been substance abuse, significant substance abuse, and they've sat and they've worked with the coach on a safety plan to manage that in the context of a parenting plan. So that, rather than, going through the court and having the court direct the testing or, that kind of a situation, they're actually coming up with something collaboratively that is going to keep the kids safe. Wow. So that can be a cost saving too.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's great. And the other thing I was just thinking of, people really usually don't think about is the mental health aspect.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, because again, the re-abuse in the court process, the PTSD, the anxiety, the depression, whatever sets in as you're in that court battle. And again, this could drag on for years and years. And then the amount of money that you can spend both for yourself, your children, whatever, it's quite expensive to try to get at the source of all of those side effects.
Yeah. And what you're hitting on too is there is a value that is, you can't even quantify, that there's that value of the emotional, the conservation of emotional resources. Something is, I talk about conserving or plenty of people in my field talk about conserving your emotional and financial resources by using these approaches. Because I've seen people just become completely depleted. Their finances are depleted. Their emotional reserves are depleted. They can no longer be in this, anywhere in the same hemisphere with their former. And this has the potential to allow people to make this transition so much more gracefully.
That's wonderful. Well, so I'm just putting myself in the shoes of someone listening, and if they're in one of these situations, it hasn't escalated. They just know that, they've tried and tried. It's not working out, and they want to end the relationship, the marriage, whatever it is. And they would like to bring their partner to an agreement to go through mediation. What are the number one, selling points that would kind of, sway, convince, whatever, the partner who might be angered by just the mere act of asking for a divorce or allowing that person to leave?
Well, I think for most of the people I've worked with, cost is almost always a factor. Nobody wants to spend a lot of money to get divorced. Right. And one of the challenges is that regardless of whether you want to spend a lot of money, divorce can be expensive. You're making one of the most important, I always tell people, you're signing one of the most important legal agreements of your life. And you wouldn't, if you think about what you might spend on a couch or what you might spend on a stove, that if you cheap out on it too much, you might not get the quality that you need. Right. So you have to put some resources towards getting an agreement that's going to be the right agreement. It's going to be long standing. It's going to, address all of the different concerns that you have, and also make sure that you're identifying all of the issues and really understanding the decisions that you're making. Because unfortunately, I do see people who go through the process as quickly as they can and as cheaply as they can, and then they come out of it 7 years later and they go, "Oh my God, we didn't do this right. This needs to be changed now." Yeah. So we try to forecast as much. So cost savings is almost always the number one. And the other piece is the kids, is talking about what you shared, is that if we go through the court process, we give up our power either to the attorneys. Sometimes, there's great litigation attorneys out there who do not approach their cases in a way that is, traditional and belligerent. And they're wonderful people, and there's an important role that court can play. And they might say, "Listen, we have been struggling for a long time," but they might say to their partner, we've been struggling for a long time. It seems as though we need to consider making this transition. I don't want to go through a court and have all of our laundry aired out in public. So privacy is another.
It's huge, yeah.
Privacy, efficiency, cost, having it dragged out. If we use one of these options, either mediation, or if we want to have attorneys and the support of a team in the room with us, collaborative law, if we use one of these processes, we get to stay in control. We can make these decisions. We can get through this efficiently, and we can make sure that we preserve our resources for our kids.
And dignity.
And dignity. Dignity is huge. We talk about dignity all the time in my line of work. Dignity is so important for both people. For the person who is being told or has heard, the way that you were saying this is abusive. Their dignity is relevant too. And their ability to, they might be given skills to understand the impact of their behavior in this process that they wouldn't be given in another situation. They would just be triggered and could, retreat into even, exacerbated behaviors.
Yeah, I do think that the court system can actually exacerbate, like, if somebody's a bully or abusive or whatever. I think that is rewarded.
Yeah.
Encouraged by, depending on the type of attorney that you choose, you could choose somebody who, just, even if you go into it thinking, oh, this stinks, I just want this to be over. I want to kind of make it fair for my kids, fair for my ex, and just get through it. If you sit down with the wrong attorney and hire them, then, your dukes are up.
Exactly. Yep.
And, casting aspersions and blaming, shaming, digging up things, making up things that are not really true or half true. And that's the part that people don't talk about enough, I think. I think you can find information on this in forums, but just in terms of putting it all on the table, I think that stuff doesn't just go away when everything is agreed upon and you sign your documents. Like, you walk away with long-term, you're carrying all of the weight of that. And you probably are going to need therapy and some kind of, whether it's nature, yoga, therapist, PTSD type stuff, whatever. It just kind of sticks. And so I think this is so much more, just peaceful and fair.
Yeah. And you just said made me also think the other thing that I think happens to people when they go into when they use a court involved situation and their attorneys are kind of following that same model, that's what they've learned, and that's what they then have to fall back on when they come up with, there's inevitable conflict that's going to come up in the future. Things are going to happen. Your kids are going to change. Life is going to change. Someone's job is going to change. And then they fall back, and then they're stuck in the court system for a long time. So when you're also looking at cost savings, the other thing that you get when you use a mediation or a collaborative law process is that you get a team that you can then go back to. So when things change, or if things become difficult in the future, you've either been given enough skills or learned enough skills through the process that you can then address that on your own sometimes, or you have professionals around who are then can meet with you once or twice, come up with a new agreement, address these changed circumstances, and you don't have to go back to court ever again.
Wow. That's just, that right there sounds amazing, because things they're going to come up. Your kids get older, things change, jobs change, like whatever it is, or people need to move, and it's inevitable. So I love that idea. And the skills piece is huge, because I think the difference between learning what seems to work in the court system, which I think can be quite dirty and underhanded and all about, like, getting the upper hand, maybe in the not, in the most, again, dignified way. I just think that difference is one that can't be underscored, really.
Yeah. Well, the court system was set up at a time when we had to prove fault. In order for people to get a divorce, they had to prove fault, almost in a criminal sense. So it's completely ill-fitting to the family transitions that we have now, where irretrievable breakdown and no fault is pretty much the rule, the law of the land. So we've accepted that relationships change. That's something that we've accepted in a social way at this point in time in our society. But the law hasn't caught up. The process through the court hasn't caught up.
Right. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's why these other systems, exist. And we have to do a better job as collaborative lawyers to communicate that there is this alternative for people. People generally know about mediation, and often they will not go through mediation because they just don't feel, either they don't feel safe in the room emotionally, they don't feel that they can be their best advocate, and they don't know either how to get the resources that they need so that they can be a better advocate in the room, or they don't know that there's this other process that has elements of mediation, but it's sort of more of there's a team support in addition to just the mediator in the room.
Right. So the collaborative versus the...
Yeah. And you have attorneys as part of your mediation process too. And I've had people be very successful using attorneys as supports out of the room, even collaboratively trained attorneys out of the room, then coming into the mediation together. and being able to kind of, it's almost like a deconstructed form of the collaborative law process, but, a little bit different. So having these options available to people in the right circumstances. I mean, the professionals who are involved have to do the appropriate screening and have to talk with people so that they really understand what they are choosing, what they are potentially giving up by not using the court process, and what happens if they can't resolve it in mediation or collaborative law. And that does happen on occasion, and sometimes people still have to go to court for one reason or another. And they never give up that option entirely.
Right. Okay. Well, so if somebody is thinking of going down this path, can you kind of give us an idea of what that would look like? Like, how do you start that process? And
well, it's going to look different for each different professional. When people work with me, the way that it starts, if they're working with me as a mediator, often one person will call me, and I have an intake process where I speak with each person for 20 minutes to half an hour on the phone to talk about the process, to hear just enough about what's happening so that I can give them information and help them evaluate what process option might be best for them. So that's sort of my complimentary intake to help people evaluate their options. And if mediation seems like the right fit after both people have talked with me, then they come in and they start the process with me with a joint meeting, and we get started. I send a lot of information to people before they come into my mediation room so that they have both communication tools and information about the issues that they're going to be addressing, whether it's divorce or whether it's parenting or whether it's college expenses or and I do elder mediation and family mediation of various sorts.
Wow. Okay.
If somebody is thinking about collaborative law, it might unfold in the same way, but after speaking with me, one person or both people might say, you know what, we really want to resolve this out of court, and we also want to have that team involved. And there can be many different reasons for wanting to have that team involved actively during the process, in which case, one person might choose me as their lawyer, and then I can then either help them provide information to their spouse that helps their spouse decide that they also want to choose this process, and how they can then find another collaboratively trained attorney of their choosing. Sometimes people evaluate the process by first actually meeting with somebody with a coach facilitator, who could then transition to either be a mediator, because there are mediators in Massachusetts who are therapists trained. So they might do their initial intake or their initial consultation with somebody who serves in that capacity.
Okay. And how would they find that person?
That's a great question. So in Massachusetts, there are two main family organizations. We have the Mass Council of Family Mediators, so mcfm.org, and there are listings of professionals on that website. So people can find somebody either in their area and I always encourage people to speak with a couple of folks first. Most people will at least talk with you on the phone or have a brief meet and greet so that you get a sense if they're going to be a good fit for you.
Okay.
And, going with your gut, and I have some information on my website, so my colleagues have information on their website about, what are some of the questions that you're going to ask? How do you evaluate whether this person is really going to help you with your big picture goals, with the multifaceted goals? Okay. So Mass Council of Family Mediators, and then Massachusetts Collaborative Law Council is our umbrella organization for collaborative attorneys and collaborative coaches and also collaborative financial neutrals. Okay. And so that's massclc.org.
Massclc.org. And so for Massachusetts, that covers it. If they're in another state listening,
so we have an umbrella organization for there's the American Professional Family Mediators. I can't remember their acronym, but I know that I'm going to give you a bunch of information to post. So there's an American Council of Professional Family Mediators, I think is the organization umbrella for finding a family mediator, and then collaborativepractice.com is our international collaborative law organization, and you can find organizations in your area. There's collaborative practice groups in every state and in, I think it's 150 different countries around the world, of collaborative practitioners. So you can find somebody in your area through one of those ways.
So when you find one of those, does that mean that whomever you speak with would have kind of a ready-made team available? So it would be the lawyers plus?
Oh, it's a great question. No, I think every team is kind of built around the people who are, whose situation they're working with. So,
Okay.
when somebody comes to see me, I might listen very carefully to who their spouse is or what the other person is, and then think about options for attorneys that will meet their needs. Because if the other person is successful, my client is going to be more successful too. That's one of the mindset changes in this approach. So, and sometimes the other person is willing to take my suggestions, and sometimes they're not. And in the same way, we will think about the different issues that are going to be presenting for this couple, and think about who might be the coaches that will best support this couple. There are coaches that have different styles. They're more directive, they're more stern, they're more, warm and fuzzy. There's some professionals that have more experience with substance abuse or with sort of access to personality challenges. So we will think carefully and give recommendations to our clients, and then the clients evaluate those options, and the team gets built around really what's going to best support this group of people. That's how it happens in Massachusetts, at least.
Yeah.
In other states, sometimes there are teams that tend to work together quite often. I mean, we're all small communities of people. We spend a lot of time together. We all kind of put our heart and soul into this work.
Wow. Okay. You're really people-centered.
Very much so. Yep.
Solutions-oriented. I love that.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm just guessing that then is something that will take time, and people need to be prepared that they may have to interview people or,
Yeah, they may. It may take, again, it can kind of come together quickly. I've had collaborative cases, and I've certainly had mediations that have kind of come together. I had a mediation come in last week where there was some really significant emotional concerns, and there had actually been some, physical concerns, and they came in right away to diffuse the situation. And there's a safety plan in place for them. Oh. So they needed to come in right away and kind of get that initial diffusing happening immediately. And then they can build their attorneys off to the side. They're going to work sort of in that deconstructed way that we discussed, where I'm the mediator and they both have collaboratively trained attorneys who are working with them on the side.
Wow. So in that case, does that mean that whomever was maybe escalating and, that person was able to admit that's the case? Because they often...
Yeah, that was the situation here, is that there was an acknowledgement that things are really hard, that they're both getting triggered, and that they need to make a change.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be kind of a necessary piece to agreeing to do all this, is you have to be able to acknowledge that that's actually happening, which sometimes
doesn't happen. I've had mediations where it takes 2 or 3 mediations before people are really willing to see what happens, or they can't admit it in the room with the other person. But if I pull them aside and I start working with them one-on-one and talking with them, they can acknowledge what is happening, and they can recognize it. But, we all want to be the hero in our own narrative. So most of us will defend and blame rather than acknowledge and empathize, particularly when triggered. Yeah. Unless we've developed, unless we have sort of a well-developed ego and some strategies to manage that defensive behavior. That's sort of the way that our brains work by nature.
Great. Wow. Whew. Well, this is really, really helpful. And I'm just looking at the clock here. I was just wondering if there's, and you left a lot of resources for people to check out regardless of where they live. So we'll put them in the show notes. But I'm just wondering if there's anything that we haven't covered that you would like to kind of pull out of this conversation.
I think one of the concerns that I hear a lot of the time is I don't even know how to, I'm scared to do this because I don't feel like I will be protected if I don't have the court safety net, either financially, particularly financially is where I hear it, is making those decisions financially. That is a consideration that people need to weigh. Because what you have when you go through a court-involved situation is you do have certain legal tools and legal protections that are in place by virtue of the court process. That when you choose mediation or choose an out-of-court process, you're voluntarily agreeing to do those things. So, for instance, you're voluntarily agreeing to maintain the status quo, or voluntarily agreeing to continue to pay the bills in a certain way, or do this. So again, that takes communication at the outset. That issue alone, I want people to know that that issue alone, being scared that your spouse may stop, providing support, or may stop paying the mortgage, or it's a fear I hear over and over again. That's an important concern, or that they might start moving assets, or that they might start doing something. It's an important concern, and it's one of the factors that I discuss with my clients when they're deciding whether or not this is the right choice for them. And it can be addressed at the initial meeting. It can be addressed, between the attorneys. Sometimes that's a reason why having attorneys involved can be helpful, is to ensure that money or that financial status quo is preserved. But it's a real concern. And when you go through a mediation or a collaborative law process, you don't have the ability to, use subpoenas and subpoena bank records historically. So both people have to commit to being transparent. So it's one of the factors that people need to weigh, but it is absolutely manageable. And I've seen people who have been absolutely petrified that their spouse will never, ever, ever be transparent and will never do what they need to do in order to keep things preserved for the kids. And their spouse absolutely wants to do that. And it's really the court process, I think, that winds up so often triggering people, like you said, to kind of engage in this bad behavior.
Right. Wow. Well, that's a really good, those are all really great points. I'm glad you hit on that, because I'm sure there's people in the audience thinking those exact things. So that's great. Yeah. And I think it's hopeful to know that, it is a process, and kind of just starting the process may help move things along. So it seems like one party's dragging their feet. Once they learn a little bit more about it, they might start to feel more comfortable as well. Because the privacy piece, I'm wondering about that. I don't know, like with court records and that kind of thing, like when you're doing this privately, I assume everything's kind of kept, between you, whereas with the court piece, it's family court, I guess, so it's not really public, but it's just...
It is public.
Right, but talk a little bit about that, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
Piece, yeah.
So family court, unless there's a very specific reason otherwise, everything that you do in family court is out in the open. Hearings are open.
Anybody can
in adoption proceedings, they are open. Anybody could be in the audience, and it's all public record.
Right.
Your final divorce judgment is also almost always public record. So what happens in a collaborative law or mediation process is all the discussions that you have getting up to that final point, those are all confidential. So how you get to your final agreement is not, that doesn't become part of your final court record.
Okay.
And so I have had people who have at times, for one reason or another, have requested that the court keep part of their final divorce agreement, what's called impounded. The court doesn't like to do it very often and has to have a very good reason. But for instance, in a situation where having substance abuse on a discoverable family law divorce agreement could have a significant impact on somebody's long-term employment. Sometimes, if people want to be very specific in their divorce agreement about that, sometimes the court is willing to impound and make that part of the divorce agreement or the divorce judgment protected and kept away from public eye. So you're keeping all of your affairs private, all of your decision-making private. You're not talking about your spouse in the middle of an open room with other people present. You had said something else while you were speaking that made me think. You had talked about... I can't remember. You said something else that made me think about another thing to mention, but it's gone. Sorry.
Well, I think that is a significant motivator, especially where you have one person who's maybe, in a high-powered position in their career, or they're out in the public eye and they really want to, kind of just keep things under wraps. what I've seen quite a few times is with very wealthy couples, the woman or man in that situation is economically deprived and controlled and threatened by the person who's, the bigger earner.
Yep.
Maybe with the big job, position, career, whatever. Yep. And so I think that that's a really good selling point too. It's like, do you want all of this in court records that are public? Yep. You want to preserve your dignity, your public rep. Why not try to do this?
Absolutely. This can be, for I have seen and have done a number of very, couples who have very, very, very significant wealth. And this can be an excellent process because not only that, but, when you're leaving the decision-making in the hands of the judges to manage some of these complex affairs, sometimes the judges have those skills and sometimes they don't. What you have in an out-of-court process is you can use additional support. So I bring in a neutral financial professional in many of my cases who can help people thoughtfully evaluate how they're going to divide their assets so that both of them are positioned to grow in kind of a similar way going forward, even when one person is the higher income earner. Or they can thoughtfully evaluate how they're going to address support so that they actually both come out in a good position, so that, it might be an interplay between alimony and child support that winds up benefiting the whole family. And you can kind of use a more thoughtful and information-centered approach rather than an adversarial competitive mindset in coming to those decisions.
Wow. Well, that's huge. Cut and paste that. That'll put that at the front of this interview because I think that's a significant motivator right there. So yeah, it's one of the things. Unfortunately, when you have just you've heard the Abraham Maslow. When your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah, exactly. That's what happens in the court process. They have to use the narrow law that the judges have in order to make these decisions. We've got we can look at this from all the different facets when we're working in this interdisciplinary model or either of these interdisciplinary models and help people thoughtfully approach the situation and look both at the here and now, 6 months from now. One of the questions I always ask people, and actually this is the thing to leave there to give you. For people to sit and remember that they get to tell the story. They get to create the story that they look back on of this time in their life. And choosing the process is one of the most important ways that they can essentially create the story, both for themselves and also for their children. So if there's children involved, what is the story that you're helping your children write for this memory? And as you think about what do you want for yourself in 6 months? What do you, if this might not be where you wanted to have been, but given that you are here, given that this is the situation and you have to make this transition, if you look back on this 2 years from now, 6 years from now, 20 years from now and say, well, we didn't want to be there, but we did it and we did it successfully. We did it right. What does that look like? What happens? Okay, now how do you get there? That's how you choose your process. What's the process that's going to get me there? Think about those goals and then use the process that's going to help you get to those goals.
That's great because this really fractures families and friends. So, yeah, that's awesome. That's a great note to lead on. Leave and lead on. Well, thank you so much for your time. Oh
my goodness, it's great.
Awesome.
And I am always a resource for people. I'm always happy to talk about this work. I'm one of the trainers in Massachusetts. I'm on the board of directors of both organizations, and I'm always happy to speak with people, even if they're not in my area and they're, they wouldn't become a client of mine. I'm happy to also be a resource to directing them to professionals. So that's, and I think most of the people in my community feel similarly.
Wow, that's great. So listen to that, folks. People who are listening, ladies, men, because I think if you're considering it and you need maybe just even a few very specific questions, go right to the source.
Yeah, I'm always happy to talk to people.
That's so nice. Thank you, Amy. This is a blessing, I think. So I just want to say that just because I know the holiday season, it's so hard on people. And if anyone's listening to this now and they're feeling just so much pressure, or maybe they're feeling anxiety, depression, like what it is so common for things like this to really escalate during the holiday season.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the stats are in the divorce world, but I think a lot of divorces are filed, kind of in the new year, right?
Oh, yeah. I get very busy right before Christmas and right after. Absolutely.
Right, exactly. So I think that this is great timing. And just thank you so much for your perspective, your wisdom, your guidance, and just giving us kind of the inside scoop. And then also just for being available for people to reach out to you. I think that's going to be really helpful for whoever this is really resonating with right now. So
well, thank you for this opportunity and thank you for providing the service that you do for the community of your listeners, because it's so important.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Like what you heard and want to be a guest on the show? I'd love to hear your story, or if you have something inspirational, a book, an event, maybe tips, something for this audience, I'd love to talk to you. Reach out to me at steph@theaudaciouslife.com. It's STEPH at theaudaciouslife.com. No one can spell audacious life, so feel free to Google that, theaudaciouslife.com, and you can try to connect with me there. Also, I am relaunching the newsletter, so if you want to get on the list, please fill out the form on theaudaciouslife.com, and you'll be seeing changes to that website as well as I add more resources, books, tips, anything that I think would be helpful for you guys. And I would love your feedback to know, like, what is missing? What are you trying to find out there that's just not available to you? So feel free to reach out to me. I want to do everything I can to build up the website, beef up the podcast, and just give you more value and support, because we all need it. And I know it well, and anything that I can do to make the path a little smoother for anyone else on the same route, I will do what I can to make that happen. All right. Well, with that said, have a great day. And I really, truly do wish you a bright and peaceful, joyful 2017. Take care.